everybody who's already joined for this program. This is a webinar the labor codes. My name is Raju Goel and I'm from Elsina. We thank Messrs. Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan, a very famous company in this area of legal advice and legal practice. And we thank you, sir, for offering to do this program with us. Elsina is basically organization which has been serving the electronics manufacturing industry for a very long time now. We've been around since 1967, so we have completed 52 years. And we are basically always focused on the technical aspects. But it's really nice to do this program because this is an area of great interest for everybody. Labor laws and labor codes, as they are now being re-questioned, are a very sensitive area. It is something which is always of great concern for I would say the industry in particular, because the fact they are working and their performance in many ways. And there are so many dimensions to it. There is a legal dimension, there is an economic dimension, there is a human dimension, and then and then there is also a political dimension to this. So it is a very sensitive area, and it's a very important area for the economic well-being of a country. So I think this progress that we are making is very important. This change that is coming about, and I'm sure that the experts, we have two great experts with us today from the company. Mr. Sudhir Sharma, he's the executive partner in corporate law team of the company. Mr. Sharma has experience in corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, and transaction advisory. And I'm sure that you have deep knowledge about the labor issues and the labor codes, which are of so much importance to our industry. Then we have with us Mr. Nurul Hassan. He is the joint partner in Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan, and he heads the corporate and commercial law practice of the Hyderabad branch. We welcome both of you, sir, once again, and we thank you for doing this program with us. And we also thank all the participants who are now joining in very good numbers. I'm sure it will be, a great webinar for all of us and a great learning. Thank you so much. And I would now hand over to the speakers. I believe it will be Mr. Sudhir Sharma first. So may I please hand over to him?
Thank you so much, Rajuji, for the kind introduction. And it's a pleasure on our part to be associated with this association for such a long time. And yet again, this opportunity has been provided to us to share our thoughts and to hear you as well on the proposed labor codes, and which you rightly and very correctly mentioned that it will have many sort of implications from various dimensions which you mentioned on Elsina as well and other industries. With this, we would like to commence with the presentation. I hope my voice is audible to all concerned, because I could see some messages on the chat window earlier that the volume is not that great. But I hope that now the volume and the audio quality is up to the mark.
I can hear you very clearly, Mr. Sharma. I can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. So, first of all, I think we will give you as to where do we stand today. Broadly, there are four labor codes. One is called the SS code, which essentially deals with social security related aspects like provident fund, etc. Second is industrial relations, which deals with the conciliatory mechanism as well as to how to deal with the disputes. So that is that particular code. Third is the occupational safety and health and working conditions code. And the fourth one, last but not the least, is the code on wages. except for the code on wages, all the other three codes, they were introduced in the Lok Sabha as well as passed in both the houses of the parliament in the month of September 2020 itself. And the Honorable President has already given the assent to it. So far as the wages code is concerned, that was passed in July 2019 in Lok Sabha, and then in August 2019 in Rajya Sabha, presidential assent has been given. But one common feature for all the codes is, this is the status as of date, is the appointed date or the effective date, they have not yet been notified. And the rules which are always required, because to supplement the provisions of the code, because at many places it says, as in any other law, that such and such thing has to be done in the prescribed manner. So those prescriptions will come in the form of rules. So in short, presidential assent has been received for both the codes, but the appointed date, that has not yet been mentioned, that has not yet come out, and the rules have not yet been notified. So as on date, you are going to continue with the way you have been managing the labor related matters as per the existing laws. Now we can so with this, what are we basically going to talk about is the introduction of OSHW code. What are the salient features therein? There are some similarities, as in any other law. There will be some changes. And what are the steps which you as industry can consider when you have to implement or you have to make preparations from the perspective of these labor codes? This is what broadly today we are going to discuss. If you look at the labor codes, the first one, what has it done? I mean, what is the purpose, or why it has been brought into effect? Purpose is that today they have consolidated various laws in this particular code, which in short is OSHW, that is Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. There are a plethora of laws which have been subsumed and consolidated. I will name a few which may be impacting ELSINA members. Factories Act, Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act, that is the CLRA. Third, the Interstate Migrant Workmen Related Act. These are the three important statutes which has now become part of this code. What is it trying to do? What is the objective of this code, which we can, if we look at the blueprint or the footprint, what is it the code trying to do? So far as the consolidation exercise is concerned, it reminds me also of various consolidation which has taken place under the foreign exchange laws also, where earlier the department used to issue various press notes and people used to run from pillar to post, and there was no one particular document which they could have referred, and then they came up with the idea of consolidation, and we saw foreign direct investment policy, the consolidated FDI policy. We already had GST, one nation, one tax. To a certain extent, if you look at the objective, they're trying to do things or simplify. That is at least their objective. In this particular code, they have mentioned that one establishment, if you are falling within the purview of this code, one registration. So previously what used to happen is that you are taking registration under Factories Act, you are taking registration under CLRA as principal employer. No. What they are telling is that if you are an establishment which is covered, we will discuss about the applicability part, then one registration will be applicable to you. In this code, as in any other law in today's time, and the government's objective is to have digital India, where we want to have less physical interaction with the authorities so that the weeds of corruption, that is one of the idea, can be wiped out. India wants to grow more in terms of World Bank and other rankings so as to make India a better place for the perspective of doing business. And with that in view, government has tried, definitely an attempt has been made that most of the filings, I would say, can be done electronically. But whether it will do away with the inspector Raj or not, that is something needs to be seen, which we are going to discuss in brief subsequently. So the broad framework of the code is, they have defined what all, how, which all establishments will get covered, what all are the authorities or regulatory framework, the registration process, that is the entire life cycle, right from opening and including if there is any ownership or management change, and then the closure of an establishment, what will be the employer and the employee's duties, and what will be the employee's rights, what all health and welfare mechanisms are required to be put in place by the employer, and what will be the regulatory mechanism or the prescriptions related to working hours and leave. This is what, in essence, in short, the code is trying to put in place, or stitched something in the form of a code. Now, when we go to the applicability part, one thing which I would like to share with is, as a concept, one is a concept of worker, second is a concept of contract labor, third is a concept of employee, fourth is a concept of interstate migrant worker. These, and fifth definitely is an employer. So you have got an employer and you have got these four people on the other side, so that you can remember vis-a-vis, these terms are different and these terms are of important usage, because from the perspective of an employer there are certain do's and do not prescribed for each category. Then there is a concept of contractor, who basically is going to provide contract labor to your establishments. What is the applicability? So first of all, we are used to various definitions of factory and all those things. What, as a global mandate under this code has been prescribed, is that every establishment, okay, what is an establishment? Any place where you are doing any industry, trade, business, manufacturing, occupation, so your offices, so your factories, all that will fall within the purview of the term establishment. You may have an office in Noida, you may have a factory in Andhra Pradesh or Gujarat, everything is establishment. So this code, like labor laws, even if you look at the existing labor laws, it is not entity-wise, that ABC Private Limited, no. It is the establishment of that particular entity. From that perspective, we have to see whether in that particular establishment, whether 10 or more workers are there or not. Now, when you look at the concept, like I said, of worker, who is a worker? What essentially is the worker? Worker is somebody who is going to do certain acts, and there is a monetary threshold which is prescribed vis-a-vis that particular act. That is what worker is all about. What is the worker going to mean? Basically, if in your office or if in your factory anybody is doing manual, unskilled, skilled, technical, operational, clerical, supervisory work, he will be treated as your worker. He is basically your employee. He is your worker. Under the previous act also, that we had the concept of worker. It's not that we had the concept of workman, rather not worker, we had the concept of workman. Now has come in the concept of worker. Only thing is, there are two major changes vis-a-vis the existing regime. They have increased the ambit of worker to include somebody who is doing technical or operational work. That is the first major change. Second major change is that right now the worker in terms of monetary threshold was somebody linked with 10,000 rupees threshold. Now what they are saying is essentially 18,000 is the monetary threshold for worker who is in a supervisory capacity, which in the existing regime it was 10,000. So this is what applicability part is concerned. What are the authorities? What are they going to do? A brief snapshot of that as well. The central government is basically going to act on the advice of National Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board. What are they going to do? They are going to advise the central government on the various standard, rules, regulations, because under this particular code, the way it is envisaged is standards will be prescribed, rules will also be prescribed. Standards will be prescribed by the central government, and those standards can be modified by the state government with the prior concurrence of the central government. So far as the rules are concerned, the appropriate government, they can modify, or they can make rules. Who is the appropriate government? Even under the existing regime, for certain industries like telecommunications, airlines, it is the central government, whereas for other things, wherever your establishment is located, that is the appropriate government, which is that is the state government. Now, the state government will also deal with certain things. They can also have at the state level, State Occupational Safety and Health Advisory Board. So you have got one at the national level, second at the state level. Third, I have received one question that if someone is in a supervisory role and is being paid less than 18,000 rupees, whether he will qualify as a worker or not. Yes, he can qualify as a worker, because he will not qualify as a worker if the wages is exceeding 18,000 rupees. I have just one humble request that we will have the question answered at the end of the session, because honestly these codes are going to take some time and we are going to share our thoughts in that limited time frame we have today. Just a humble request to everybody. Third, you also have a concept of inspector cum facilitator. So right at the beginning I said yes, you will have faceless interaction and all those things, but to enforce the provisions of the code, the inspector Raj is still there, in the sense that they do have the power to enter in at any particular place. They can inspect and they can examine also. They can also make inquiries into accident or dangerous occurrences also. So this is regarding applicability and authorities. What about registrations? So far as registrations are concerned, two broad categories. One category is you must be already having certain registrations under central labor law like Provident Fund, under the Factories Act. They can continue till their shelf life is available. So far as new establishments are concerned, and if you are having 10 or more workers in that particular establishment, once this code is notified, within 60 days you are going to make an electronic application and you will get a registration as per the prescribed process. This is how the registration is going to happen under the new regime. With this, now I think we are going to move to certain important duties and rights which are prescribed under this particular code. So far as the employer is concerned, now as an industry, you will fall within the category of employer. What do you need to do? You need to ensure that your workplace is free from all hazards. Okay. You need to ensure that as and when the occupational safety and health standards are declared, you comply with it. Third, you need to make a provision for free annual health examination for your employees. They can say that for certain category of employees. But like I said, employees is a wider term, okay, because it is not restricted to worker. So a blue collar or a white collar, in simple terms, both can be employees, whereas a blue collar will only qualify as a worker. So vis-a-vis all the employees, you need to have annual health examination mechanism. So that will add on to your compliance as well as tick boxes which you as an employer need to do. For hazardous waste, already there are certain under the environmental laws mechanisms prescribed. You need to comply with that. One more thing is that to every employee, an employment letter has to be given, and the format of that will be prescribed by the appropriate government. So as and when this code comes into effect, they will definitely give a pro forma that this is what you need to follow when you are issuing employment letter to your employees. One thing which needs to be bear in mind is that every organization is having a standard template of appointment letter. But what will happen is that once this code comes into effect, the form which will be prescribed by the appropriate government, like central government or state government, in your case, effectively, what I foresee is in most of the cases, it will be state government. That performer, your existing performer, need to consider the performer which will be prescribed by the government under the code. As and when there is some disease or dangerous occurrence, it is your duty as an employer to report it to the concerned authorities. Now, what are those disease and dangerous occurrences? There is a schedule. They are very serious ones. It's not that everything needs to be reported. That you need to adhere to. Coming to the duties of the employee. Employee also, if they have been given some rights, they also, duties and rights go hand in hand. They need to take care of themselves so that by their act or by their omissions, they do not cause any safety or health hazard to other people. For them also, certain safety and health requirements will be prescribed, and at the same time, they need to cooperate also with the employer so that the employer is not at the wrong side of law. One takeaway from that is that when you are acting as an employer, you should put in all mechanisms in place to substantiate that you as an employer are willing and you have provided sufficient opportunities to the employee to enable yourself to take care of your requirements as an employer, which also includes what you need to do as for the welfare of the employees, because tomorrow if there is a claim from an employee vis-a-vis you against as an employer, this will mitigate and you will be at a better footing to show that I was always willing to do, it was the employee who did not cooperate. What they have given as a right to the employee is broadly that if the employee feels that in a particular establishment you are not providing the requisite health and safety measures which you ought to do, he can speak with the employer through himself or through a member of the safety committee. In that committee, the representation of the employees will not be less than the employer. But if he feels that the employer is not taking sufficient steps, then what will happen is that he can go and knock the doors of the regulatory authorities, that is the inspector cum facilitator. So that right has been given to the employee for making representation. Coming to various health and welfare measures, before I begin that, I would like to put one important point across to this audience. This is not only your duty vis-a-vis your regular employees, rather this is also your duty vis-a-vis your contract labor. We are going to discuss the contract labor part in the subsequent slides, but to avoid repetition and as if responsibility which has been casted on the employer, which is a major shift if we compare it with the existing provisions of Contract Labor Abolition Act, CLRA, because there the contractor was required to provide certain amenities and facilities, and if he failed to do so, then the onus would have been on you as a principal employer. But that is no more the case. Now you as an employer in the first instance are required to provide all these health measures and working measures not only to your employees but as well as to the contract labor also. So just to give you an example, in the establishment they are going to prescribe the conditions, so the rules will definitely prescribe, but what they have mentioned, the big spots are vis-a-vis cleanliness and hygiene, ventilation, potable drinking water, lighting, latrine and urinal accommodation separate not only for male and female but for transgender also. So they have accommodated all the sections of the society. So far as welfare provisions are concerned, you need to provide washing, bathing, sitting facilities. Now we will have to think, and that is where now we need to analyze whether in a particular establishment, whether 10 or more workers are there or not, because if that is the applicability part, it cannot be the case. In factories it is fine, but say in any other establishment, first thing what you need to see is whether 10 or more workers are there or not, because if that is the applicability, then registrations come into place. Then they are going to prescribe, okay, in such establishment what all things you need to do, because in every establishment you cannot end up having washing, bathing and sitting facilities. First aid box is still achievable. Canteen is something where they have said that 100 or more workers including contract labor, if at a particular location A in a factory or in a big organization, that is the threshold which is being reached, then canteen needs to be provided. One important development is creche. Now they have specifically provided that not only for workers, for all your employees, free of, basically you need to provide a facility which is in the nature of a creche. You can provide it on your own, you can pool it with other industry members, or you can avail the common facility a creche which has been established by central government or state government. So this will definitely add to your compliance tick box. So far as the working hours and leave are concerned, by and large, the scheme remains the same: 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. Overtime is twice the rate of wages. The employment restriction, keeping in mind the health requirements of an employee, if he is working in a factory, then he cannot work in another factory. The dual employment has been barred. Notice for workplace, these all things you have been complying with under the regulatory current regulatory scheme of affairs also, which you will be required to comply here also. Leave with wages, if somebody is working 180 days or more, he will get one paid leave for every 20 days of work, and they have prescribed that in case of death or dismissal or basically if he resigns, what is the time frame within which you need to basically give him the payment which is due to him. It's the time frame has been prescribed very clearly, and which we need to adhere to. Essentially, in case of dismissal or discharge or quit, it will be second working day. If somebody has superannuated or there is a case of death, it will be 2 months from the date of death or superannuation. What are the major changes? Broadly, we will talk about the contract labor. Contract labor, the threshold has been revised. What they have said is, earlier, whenever the threshold was there vis-a-vis contract labor thing, the threshold was 20 workers. So in any establishment, what they have said is, now instead of 20, if there are 50 or more contract labor will basically be a worker, okay, who has been given to you by a contractor or any. So one criteria is that if you as an employer in your establishment 50 or more contract labor is getting employed in the preceding 12 months, that is condition 1, or it is not and, either or condition 2 is that every contractor who has himself employed 50 or more contract labor, that also will get covered. Now what they have done is, so far as the contractor is concerned, there may be an occasion that he may be having say 50 or 100, say 60 employees. But to the extent certain employees are solely working for his establishment, they will not be treated as contract labor because they are not somebody who is being given to principal employers, which is the employers. Like I said, the ambit, Nurul, we can shift to the next slide. The other part is, we already discussed the ambit of the worker being increased to include technical and operational people as well. Now here, since you have already taken a registration vis-a-vis your establishment, you are not required to further take another registration as a principal employer. So you see some glimpse of one establishment, one registration thing, which is a welcome change. Second is, so far as the contractor is concerned, he will be given a license for a period of 5 years. Now suppose to a particular case, neither of the conditions are being met with. Say in an establishment, neither 50 or more contract labor is working, neither is there a case that there is a manpower supply contractor who is having 50 or more contractor in the last 12 months. So in that case, what will happen is that for a particular work order, the contractor will be required to take work order specific license. So that is a new concept which they have tried to build in. What they intend to do is the government will keep a tab as to who all are working under a normal category, that is 50 category being breached, or even if it is not being breached, where all contract labor is being supplied, so that they can keep a tab on this. Now, whenever a contractor is supplying any contract labor to a particular establishment, not only you as an establishment have already taken registration, contractor has also taken registration, he also needs to intimate the concerned authorities. So the information flow has been tightened. As and when the government requires, they can see where all the contract labor is involved. So far as the welfare facilities are concerned, we have already discussed that now the onus has been shifted to you. Your is the principal responsibility rather than the contractor. Wage payment under the Contract Labor Act, this is a welcome change, because under the Contract Labor Act, there was an onerous requirement that you as an employer need to witness that the wages are being paid. And why is it important is that if they are not making payment of wages, you as an employer are liable. Although you can recover the same from the contractor, you can have indemnity provisions in your contract, but then they are very difficult to enforce if I look at it from the perspective of an employer, because the contractors may not have the wherewithal itself to fulfill your indemnity claim. So at least they have said that you need not witness. In today's world, everything is happening electronically. So electronic evidence can be procured by you from the contractor that he is giving the wages to the contract labor to ring fence and to mitigate your exposure as a principal employer. One more concept has been introduced is that security deposit is required to be furnished by the contractor to the government while he is taking a license. If he fails to pay wages, then as per the prescribed method, security deposit can be utilized by the government for making payment of wages to contract labor. Two major questions which arise out of that is whether the security deposit is going to be blown, then the principal employer can say that the remaining will be fulfilled by me. That has not yet been specified in the code. Second, what will be the quantum of security deposit? That is equally important, which will be through the rules. Contract labor has to give on demand an experience certificate to its employees. The contract labor. This is an important shift. Under the Contract Labor Act, what the government has said is that the trigger point is that if they want to abolish contract labor in a particular industry, what they have said is that the government is going to notify, although they have mentioned that as and when the government is going to notify, they are going to bear in mind whether it is something which is intrinsic to the particular establishment or not. Now the entire onus has shifted. They have brought in a concept of core activity. What is a core activity? A core activity is an activity in a particular establishment which is necessary or incidental to such activity. So this is important. You cannot employ contract labor so far as your core activity is concerned, but they have carved out exceptions to this general rule. What they have said is that if you require certain things, one is the general exception, like for canteen, for watch and ward services, security services, courier services, gardening, you can do all housekeeping. That is definitely, you can have those as contract labor. But say you want to employ somebody in admin, you want to employ somebody in your day-to-day activity, then for those things, in the general exceptions, the case will not fall. Rather, what will happen is you need to see whether the exceptions other than the general exceptions, the kind of services which I mentioned, I'm referring to them as general exceptions. If you can substantiate that something is required for normal functioning of an establishment as a contract labor, you can justify that, or you can say that there is a sudden increase in volume of work in relation to core activity, or you can substantiate that no full-time workers are required, then you can take benefit of these exceptions in spite, and you can take contract labor in spite of that being utilized for your core activity. Next. I think interstate migrant worker, they have revised the threshold from 5 to 10. The government, I think, has also drawn some lessons from the COVID impact. That is also can be seen. One major change what they have done is that vis-a-vis interstate migrant workers, basically an interstate migrant worker is that if I as a worker, I am resident in A and I am taking employment in B, or you are offering me employment, I am in A and you are offering me employment in B state, that is what will qualify as interstate migrant worker. Again, they have tried to say keep the threshold of 18,000, that monthly limit, they will qualify as interstate migrant worker. One important thing is that the benefits under the ESIC, EPF and all those things, now as an employer also, you need to take care of. In EPF, under the current mechanism, there are certain contradictory judgments related to EPF with respect to the obligation of principal employer. But I think under this act particular, they are going to settle that, and the onus will be on the employer for providing EPF. ESIC in any event you need to comply, plus you need to give one journey allowance as per the prescribed thing, so that the interstate migrant worker can go to his home state and there is no homesickness per se. Next, factories, irrespective of these numbers which we see, for the purpose of registration, the golden thumb rule is 10 only. So far as factory is concerned, registration, that will, for registration purpose, 10 or more workers. What will qualify as a factory with power, they have, if you are doing manufacturing process, they have increased the threshold from 10 to 20. Without power, they have increased the threshold from 20 to 40. For appointment of welfare officer, the limit has been revised from 500 to 200 and increased to 500 from 250. Again, they have retained the provision. They can say that they can declare any place to be a deemed factory for the making the provisions of this code to be applicable. Some steps, there are many stakeholders involved as in a particular exercise. So therefore, even if you are taking certain goods or plant and machinery for usage, a designer, a manufacturer, importer, supplier, certain responsibilities have been casted on them also. For them also certain things will be prescribed. So therefore, when you are making a compliance manual, you have got interstate migrant worker, you have got your own employees, worker, contractor, what documentation you need to do with the people whom you have already entered into contracts with, what literature they are providing to you, because if you are using any plant and machinery in your machine, in your establishment, then there are certain prescriptions for that as well. All those things needs to be seen from the perspective of an employer. without incurring too much cost and focusing more on business, what kind of review can you do to ring fence or to safeguard your interest so that there is no effect on you as an employer or as a principal employer? Maybe you can consider quarterly review. Maybe you need to again consider your compliance manual, because otherwise as an employer you will end up having certain maybe penalties at your end if you are not complying with the requisite provisions. Like, just to give you an example, maybe you can consider taking timesheets of certain people. If an contractor is giving you employees, you can ask to what extent he is getting employed in your establishment, because it may not be the case that the same person is coming to your establishment. Last but not the least, you should be very careful vis-a-vis your contract labors, the contracts, what kind of arrangements you are having, whether it is purely manpower or whether it is manpower plus service. What are the safeguards that are built in so that you do not end up becoming the employer of those employees? The primary control should be with the contractor, so those clauses in your existing contract definitely needs to be seen. These are some of the steps which we thought. Obviously, compliance prevention is better than cure. Your compliance manual needs to be watertight, and you need to sanitize people across all departments, as well as work with other stakeholders like contractors and people who are supplying you plant, machinery or raw material which is being used in an establishment, so that you can take care of your responsibilities as an employer. With this, we will move on to the Industrial Relations Code. Again, the objective is primarily to deal with certain laws related to trade unions, conditions of employment, and how are we going to deal with industrial disputes. That is what essentially we are going to talk about. The major acts which have been subsumed, or the three acts which have been subsumed, is the Trade Unions Act. You already have a Standing Orders Act and the famous Industrial Disputes Act. These have been subsumed in this particular code. Now, they have built in a concept of reskilling fund. So if tomorrow a worker is getting retrenched, they have prescribed a threshold. You as an employer need to contribute to that fund. They may also prescribe certain other funding sources. How are we going to deal with standing orders? They have brought in a new concept of negotiating trade union and negotiating trade council, which I feel is a good thing if I look at it from the perspective of an employer. Certain tweaks have been done vis-a-vis strike-related mechanism. And obviously, yes, there are penalties, but one good thing in this entire code is that they have tried to do away with criminal penalties, and this is a welcome change, which we also saw the footprint of that in the latest Companies Amendment Act also. So that is something which I must appreciate the government is taking, because the business people should not be hassled with that. So far as strike is concerned, broadly the concept of strike remains the same, but if there is a concerted casual leave on a given day by 50% or more workers of a particular establishment on a given day, that will qualify as a strike. Then what has happened is they've made an attempt to stream down the process of strike. Previously, this process was in place for public utility services. Now it has been extended to all the establishments. You need to give a notice if you want to do a strike. That notice has to be valid for 60 days. Once you receive the notice as an employer, you will knock the doors and you will intimate the conciliation officer. Then, when the conciliation proceeding is going on, you cannot go on a strike. If the proceedings are before a tribunal or an arbitrator, or if an award or settlement has been reached, during that period you cannot go on a strike, which is a good thing. Otherwise, it's like a double whammy on the employer. The mirror image has been made applicable vis-a-vis lockout, because lockout is done by the management. So the same principles have been deployed vis-a-vis lockout also. Then comes the concept of layoff, retrenchment and closure. Under the Industrial Disputes Act, right now there are two broad categories. One is the category, I would say, where you have got a 50 workman category in a particular factory and all that, if you want to lay off or retrench the people, the rule is you can do that by making certain payments, and you just need to intimate the government. The other is the larger category, where if in a particular factory 100 or more workers are involved or they are working, then you need to take the prior permission of government. So it's not a question of intimation, it's a question of prior permission. One good thing is they have increased this basket of 100 employees to 300 people, and they have also given the flexibility to the appropriate government. So which means the state government can also increase the threshold to higher numbers. This, I think, is in a way to make an attempt so that industrialization takes place and the layoff and retrenchment and closure process can be done more smoothly. Workers, we have already discussed. What they have done is, instead of 10,000, 18,000 rupees is the concept for supervisory capacity. So if somebody is in that bracket, then he will qualify as a worker, otherwise he will not qualify as a worker. Tribunal was already there. It's not that tribunal was not there, but now what they've added is that for certain things, it will be judiciary and administrative member. They have prescribed the criteria also for appointment of judicial members. So I think this will bring in more flavor of justice, and they want to have more stakeholders involved rather than having only an administrative member or a judicial member. So a judicial mind will also be there in certain matters. You have got a concept of fixed term employment. It all began in the apparel industry, then they extended it to all the industries. There, one major change is now they are not only, you can have fixed term employment, but for those type of people, they are also eligible for gratuity of service if their fixed term contract is for a period of 1 year. So that is one major change which they have brought. Coming to the other major changes, like we discussed, there is a concept of negotiating trade union or trade council. You can have a trade union. There can be a case that there is a single trade union, no problem. They are only going to negotiate with the employer to thrash out the differences between the employer and employee. If there are multiple trade unions, there are two categories which are prescribed. If more than 51% of the workers are forming part of a particular trade union, then that particular trade union will be treated as a negotiating trade union. But if none of the trade unions are having 51% membership of the workers, then what they will do is they will form a negotiating trade council which will have representation for all the trade unions which are having not less than 20% of the total workers. So either you will end up having a negotiating trade union, or you will end up having a negotiating trade council to negotiate and thrash out the differences which we can have with the workers. So far as the standing orders are concerned, every establishment, now again it is 300 or more workers, either you adopt, it's a deemed adoption of the prescribed standing order. If you want to tweak the standing order within 6 months, once the code is notified, you can do that. Virul, you can shift to the subsequent slides. Yeah, this one we have discussed. The next one. Yeah, thank you. The standing orders need to be prepared within 6 months. You need to take the comments. You need to consult the negotiating trade unions or the negotiating trade council. Then you send it to the certifying authority. He will also try to take the views of the negotiating trade union and council, and then he will certify. One good thing is that now there is a deeming provision. He cannot sit over your application of standing orders. If within 60 days he does not respond, then the one which you have filed will be treated as if there is a deemed approval of the standing order. So definitely you need to bear in mind whether you are going to go for the prescribed standing order or you need to make some value addition in your standing orders. I think you can consider having your own standing order with certain guidelines in place. And obviously those guidelines needs to be framed in a carefully manner so that it is within the parameters prescribed under the code. Then comes the reskilling fund. So far as the reskilling fund is concerned, the idea is that if there is a retrenched employee, you need to give 15 days wages which he was drawing, last drawing as an employee, you need to contribute it. The government can also prescribe other sources. The idea is that if somebody has been retrenched, he gets some immediate relief, so that it's not like something he does not have anything. So that is what the intent of the government is. Coming to the dispute resolution mechanism, by and large, it remains the same. You have got bipartite forums, you have got conciliation officers, there is an arbitration mechanism, and you have got industrial tribunals also. So that will remain by and large the same. Penalties, last but not the least, the stress is on monetary penalties. Of course, if somebody is not cooperating or there is a second, third offense, I'm not getting into that, but by and large, it is monetary penalties which has been contemplated under the codes. Some of the steps which you can think is to avoid retrenchment or to have avoid bitterness. You should run training programs for your workers, for your if there is any trade union, with them you need to thrash out so that you can enhance their skills. You need to guide them what are the do's, what are the do nots. And for fixed term employees, definitely you need to look at their contracts, because like gratuity will also come into your basket as a principal employer. What all things you need to tweak in your existing contracts and as well as your new contracts. Then certain guidelines for strikes and lockouts, you can think of that. You can think of having separate guidelines, or you can make them as a part of the standing orders, which you, if you are willing to modify the prescribed ones. These are some steps which you can consider as an employer to have better relations with your employees and accordingly have better output in your establishment. With this, I will request my colleague Nurul to share his inputs on the remaining two codes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I hope I am audible to everyone. So the other two codes I would be discussing for the next 35 minutes or so would be one, the code on wages, which was again introduced sometime in 2019, and the code on social security that was introduced last month in 2020 September. So thank you for the introduction, sir. Better part of it is that most of the introductory part and the background to the wage codes I need not repeat once again. So I will directly jump to the contents of the code on wages. So basically, code on wages subsumes 4 acts, 4 legislations that discusses or deals about wages. One is Payment of Wages Act 1936, Minimum Wages Act 1948, Payment of Bonus Act 1965, and Equal Remuneration Act 1976. All these 4 legislations, barring Bonus Act, mostly talks about the wages and remuneration that is payable to the employee or worker. As far as bonus is concerned, that is considered as part of the emoluments that are being paid to the worker. Therefore, in the code on wages, they have also subsumed the Payment of Bonus Act as well. So as in other codes, even in this code also, we have uniform definitions, and it actually removes the multiplicity of compliances and also ensures rationalization in penal provisions, which we have discussed earlier in the earlier session. Now, I need not explain the definitions of employer and contractor, which have already been. I'm sorry, someone's mic is on unmute. Can you please mute? So the definitions which we have already discussed in the earlier two codes, also resembles the same kind of definitions even under the wages on code, code on wages. So one particular thing that that you need to be looking at as an addition when we see the definition of employer is the fourth bullet point, which talks about legal representative of a deceased employer. Even a deceased employer's legal representative will also be considered as employer for the purpose of the obligations and compliance requirements under the wages code as well. As far as contractor's definition is concerned, it is mostly the same. The one who undertakes to produce a given result or supplies contract labor is the one who is considered as contractor across all labor codes. In fact, the two definitions here, which talks about employee and workers, is also similar to what we have seen under the earlier codes. The only thing that we need to be mindful is that the definition of employees exclude the apprentices, even though Apprenticeship Act is still there, which is in existing and not subsumed, at least on the statute book, since it is there, they have excluded now specifically the apprentices from the definition of the employee. So definition of wages, since we are talking about the wages code, the definition of wages is extremely relevant because this is also relevant for the purpose of computation of your wages, not only wages, but also the payment of bonus act, bonus element. And also when we subsequently deal with the code on social security, there also we find a similar definition for the wage. So it basically includes three components: one, basic pay, dearness allowance, retaining allowance, and excludes certain components such as bonus, any special expenses that is paid to defray some expenditure, any commission, and value of house accommodation or supply of water, light, or other amenities, your house rent allowance, then PF and pension payments, remuneration payable under award or settlement in view of any kind of dispute, then conveyance allowance or value of traveling concession, then overtime allowance and retrenchment compensation and retirement benefits. This, so we have in the wages definition both inclusive part that talks about 3 elements and exclusive part that talks about 9 or 10 elements or components. Then when we have seen the exclusion part, the exclusions have also been capped. They have been capped to 50% of the total wages. So if the wages, I have given 2 examples here for a better understanding. So if you see on the left hand side, first example, where basic is 10,000 and HRA is 5,000 and dearness allowance is 3,000. So for the purpose of wage code, HRA is an exclusion and 10,000 basic and DA has to be included for the purpose of wages. So 13,000, in this 13,000, the excluded items, which includes HRA, should not be more than 50%. So the 50% of basic and DA is going to be 6,500. Therefore, the HRA, since it is less than 50% of the total wages, it will not be included within the definition of wages. If you see on the right hand side, we have given another example where we have talked about basic and DA on the same amounts. HRA is also same. We have also added commission, which is 2,000. So HRA and commission are being the excluded items from the definition of wages. First, we have to compute the included items, which is basic plus DA, which comes to 13,000, and 50% of this is 6,500. So the excluded items here, being 8,000 in number, they are more than 1,500 of the wages. So we have included, actually it should have been 14,500 instead of 13,500. The typo may be pardoned. Now, this is the broad understanding as to the definition of wages. And it also has a further limb, which as an explanation, which says, if an employer is paying any amount as a remuneration in kind, and that amount, the value equivalent to that kind should not exceed 15%. So if the employer is giving food coupons or any other amount or any other valued item, the amount of that valued item which is paid or which is given in kind should not exceed 15% of the total wages payable to him. Otherwise, that will also be included within the definition of wages. Now, having seen the definitions, we may now move on to the major provisions of this code. Now, basically, Equal Remuneration Act provides that there should not be any discrimination, and that discrimination is prohibited if you are engaging a person for same or work of a similar nature. So if you are engaging a man or as against a woman, you must pay for both of them. If you are engaging both of them for a work of same or similar nature, an amount equal to the equal amount. Basically, equal amount you have to pay, and you should not discriminate based on the gender. Now, the wage code further extends this gender discrimination to also include transgender. That is one addition in the wage code. And when we are defining what is same work or work of a similar nature, then the criteria can be decided based on the skill, effort, and now they have also included experience of the candidate while discriminating a person in paying the remuneration. So if the person has more experience, you may probably pay more, and that may be one of the criteria to discriminate in the remuneration that is payable between the genders. Then Minimum Wages Act, which is also subsumed, used to also provide what are the minimum wages that should be paid in relation to scheduled employments. And in fact, that scheduled employments has now been done away with, and the wage code is applicable across all employments, and the appropriate government will be empowered to fix the wage rate. Now, what the central government has done is that they have fixed what is called a floor wage rate, which may be different for different geographical areas. And this floor wage rate will be applicable across all the employments. Now, as I said, they can have different, they can fix different floor wage rates based on the geographical areas, which is in case of metropolitan areas or non-metropolitan areas. That again depends on the population. As you can also see, the central government fixes the floor wages, but the state government cannot fix a floor wage which is below the floor wage fixed by the central government. It can at best increase it than what has been prescribed by the central government. Now, as far as wages code are concerned, the minimum wages are, while fixing the floor wage, what are the various components that are to be included within the while fixing the floor wage are they will take 3 adult consumption units per household and with a daily intake of 2700 calories per consumption unit, and they will factor 3 additional components which are 10% towards rent, 20% of expenditure towards fuel, electricity and other miscellaneous items, and 25% expenditure on education, medical requirements and other contingencies. This is how the floor wage will be fixed by the central government based on these criteria. The other legislation that was subsumed within the Wages Code is the Payment of Wages Act. It used to apply to employees within a threshold limit of drawing 24,000 per month. Now this threshold limit has been done away with, and consequently this would be applicable across all the employments without any wage limit. Since it is without any wage limit, everyone who are being employed by the employer can seek the remedial measures or the benefits under the Wages Code. Earlier, under the Payment of Wages Act, what we used to have is the wage period. The wage period is the period which should not be more than 1 month. So whatever the wages earned during this wage period, that has to be paid before the 10th day after the last day of the wage period. Now under the Wages Code, you see the wage period has been rationalized further. If the employee who is engaged on a daily basis, you have to pay the wage to him at the end of the shift. And in case of weekly basis employees, then on the last working day of the week, that is to say before the weekly holiday. And if he is employed on a fortnightly basis, before the end of the second day after the end of the fortnight. And in the case of monthly basis, before the expiry of the 7th day of the succeeding month. This is how the wage period or the disbursement of the wages has to be taken care. And in case the employee is removed or dismissed or retrenched or resigns also, you have to settle his account within a period of 2 working days. This is something which you need to be very clear about as to the implementation part is concerned. I know there could be issues in respect of employees having disputes over the full and final settlement, but these are the things which we may have to see as to how they're going to be panning out while the code is going to be implemented. So the other legislation that was subsumed within this Wages Code is the Payment of Bonus Act, which is basically applicable to establishments employing 20 or more persons. As earlier, the minimum bonus is 8.33% of the wages earned by the employees, and maximum bonus which is payable to the employee is 20%. Now, one significant step that was introduced in the draft rules by the central government is that if there is a failure of the contractor to pay the minimum bonus, then the principal employer who is engaging the contract labor will be responsible to pay such bonus to the contract workers or contract employees. This is something which you need to be really thinking about as to its implementation part. So there is, as far as the eligibility is concerned, for making the payment of bonus, there is one specific disqualification that is provided under the new code, which says if the employee is convicted from any charges involving sexual harassment, then he will not be entitled to receive bonus. The inspection part, which we have already covered in our earlier presentation dealing with industrial code, I would not touch upon further this, because most of the things are going to be same or similar, except the timelines part. The only one thing as far as the timelines are concerned, that any kind of claim by an employee can be filed with the appropriate authority within a period of 3 years from the date of the time when he is eligible to get the amounts. Say if he has resigned, then the period has to be starting from the date of his resignation. Then as far as the steps are concerned, what you must be doing going forward when the code is likely to be implemented, or when the code is going to be implemented, or that as informed or as mentioned by Mr. Sudesh, you have to review or relook at the existing policies. Since the wages definition has undergone a change, then the wage structure has to be restructured in view of the components that are provided under the wage code. And then as far as your agreements with the contractors are concerned, particularly when you talk about the payment of bonus, which is now lying on the which is now also lying on the employer, the contract with the contractor has to be also seen, so that wherever possible the liability is passed on to the contractor, at least by a contractual arrangement. And you also need to have an internal mechanism where the full and final settlements can take place within a period of 2 working days from the employee moving out of the employment of the company. So these are various steps that you need to be mindful about the implementation part is concerned. So we move on to the next and last code for the day, that is Social Security Code, which is also equally important and will have most, in fact, it will have most impact than the other legislations as well. As the economic part of it, the financial part of it is likely to be subsumed within this code. One is the Employees Compensation Act 1923, ESI Act 1948, EPF and MP Act 1952, Employment Exchanges Act 1959, Maternity Benefit Act 1961, Gratuity Act 72, Senior Welfare Fund Act 81, Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act 1996, and then last but not the least, the Unorganized Workers Welfare Security Act 2008. The salient features we can discuss along with my presentation. Now, Social Security, there are various organizations that are actually provided under the SS code. One is Board of Trustees of EPF, which will be aided by the EPFO, which will be headed by the Central Provident Fund Commissioner. And then we will be having ESIC to govern the provisions relating to the employee state insurance. And then we will be having National Social Security Board. It is going to be a new one, which is going to be monitoring the welfare measures for gig workers, platform workers, and unorganized workers. These are the additional and new distinguishing features that were introduced in the Social Security Code. And then we have something what is called as State Unorganized Workers Board, and also State Building Workers Welfare Board, BOCW. These are the boards that are presently going to be taking over the implementation of the SS code. Now, as far as the applicability is concerned, the EPF is applicable to every establishment with 20 or more employees. Now, in case if you wish to voluntarily apply for EPF registration, then you can also do so as an employer, provided you have an agreement between the employer and also majority of the employees. Now, as far as employees state insurance corporation is concerned, this is also applicable to every establishment again, but the number is less with 10 or more employees. By introduction of this definition, a small anomaly has been removed, which says earlier it used to say under the ESI Act, 10 or more employees earning below the threshold amount. So the earning below the threshold amount has been removed, and plainly it applies to the establishment having 10 or more employees. And again, in order to avail the benefits of the ESIC, the employer can also agree upon and have an agreement with majority of the employees, and then he can submit himself to the ESIC and comply with the obligations under the chapter specific to ESIC and avail the corresponding benefits. And there is no much change from the existing provisions to the Gratuity Act, Maternity Benefit Act, and also Employee Compensation Act. So there are certain definitions, which one of which we have already seen with respect to fixed term employment. That the only thing which I may be adding here is that this is a flexibility that is offered to the employer to engage employees on fixed term basis. Now, the Act or the code does not specify what is the outer limit up to which you can engage a person as a fixed term employees, provided the only two conditions that you need to satisfy are that the emoluments conditions of service are going to be the same along with the other workman or the permanent employee. So long as you are complying with these other restrictions and conditions, you would be eligible, or the companies will be eligible to engage fixed term employees. So one of the legislations that was subsumed within the code is the Provident Fund. Now, basically, the EPF and Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act provides for the three kinds of schemes. One is Provident Fund scheme, then you have pension scheme, then employee deposit linked insurance scheme. These are the three schemes that are now prevalent. Now, there are no changes as far as the contributions are concerned, even under the new code. And wages, as we discussed, is the contributions have to be paid on the amount of wages that were discussed earlier. But the one unique feature that you need to note is that in addition to these three schemes, the central government has been granted authority to frame scheme for the purpose of providing social security benefits to self-employed or any other class of persons as well. So presently, the benefits are going to be only in the sense to where the employer and employee relationship are there. But going forward, the central government has been authorized to also roll out schemes for self-employed or other classes of persons. Now, the present there is a transition provision that is also being provided under the SS code, which provides that the PF, pension, and the EDLI schemes, and also the scheme under the ESI Act are going to be continued for another period of 1 year until new schemes are provided unless they are inconsistent with the existing provisions of the SS code. So therefore, the transition provision enables the PF and other schemes which are now prevalent under the PF Act and also ESI Act are going to be continued for 1 more year unless they are going to be inconsistent with the SS code. The most distinguishing factor of the SS code is that it extends social security to gig workers, platform workers, and unorganized workers, which thus far have been kept outside of the existing employer-employee relationship benefits. The benefits which are generally being available in an employer-employee relationship are now being extended to these 3 additional kinds of workers. Now, if you see, basically the definitions of gig workers and platform workers, gig worker is a one who performs work or participate in a work arrangement and earns from such activities which are outside the traditional employee-employee relationship. And so as in the case of platform worker, where the work arrangement is going to be outside the traditional employer-employee relationship and in which he will use an online platform to access other organizations or individuals to do what? To solve specific problems or to provide specific services. In the case of unorganized worker, the definition is going to be slightly different. It is a home-based worker, self-employed worker, or wage worker in the unorganized sector who is actually being covered under the as an unorganized worker. Now, several the gig worker and platform worker and unorganized worker, as far as the benefits are concerned, the benefits which are going to be available to all of them is going to be same or mostly the same. The examples, if I say for gig worker, is the drivers which are engaged by Ola and Uber, and the service provider, particularly when you see platform worker by entities like Urban Clap. So in order to avail the benefits as a gig worker, platform worker, and unorganized worker, a registration is mandatory and which is going to be again Aadhaar linked. So what are the benefits here? If you see the pyramid on the left hand, the triangle on the left hand side, what are the social security schemes that are to be offered to these workers are life and disability cover, then accident insurance, health and maternity benefit, old age protection, creche facilities, and any other facilities as may be provided. Then how do we fund? It's not, see, as far as gig worker, platform worker, and unorganized worker is concerned, they are now actually going to be, even though, so let me clarify this. In the EPF and ESI, you have an employer and employee relationship. But as far as gig worker, platform worker, and unorganized worker are concerned, they do not basically, particularly the gig and platform worker, they do not have an employer and employee relationship as such. So when the employee relationship is there in the EPF Act and ESI Act, the benefits are available to the from the employer to the employee. But here it comes indirectly to the worker. Now, as far as the aggregator who is supposed to also contribute to the benefit of the gig worker and platform worker is concerned, he is basically a digital intermediary or a marketplace for a buyer or user of a service to connect with the seller or the service provider. So he brings both buyer and seller, just a e-marketplace. Schedule 7 of the code also prescribes various kinds of aggregators, which includes ride sharing services, food and groceries delivery services, content media services, and e-marketplaces, whether it is inventory based or otherwise. Now, the aggregator may be asked to contribute for the welfare of the gig and platform worker, and the contribution may be the contribution shall not exceed 2%, but it will not going to be less than 1% of the annual turnover of the aggregator, provided the contribution by an aggregator shall not exceed 5% of the amount paid or payable by an aggregator to gig workers or platform workers. So 3 criteria has been prescribed. 1, the contribution is based on the annual turnover. Number 2 is that the outer limit is going to be not more than 2%, but inner limit is not going to be less than 1%. Something similar to what we see for as a contribution towards the building and other construction workers cess, where similar provision is also there. Now, additionally, there is a small rider here that the total contribution of the aggregator is not going to be exceeding 5% of the amount that is being paid by him to the gig or platform workers. There can be a mute question that since there is no employer-employee relationship, whether Parliament in the garb of bringing social security obligations or benefits to employer and employee relationship, can they extend it to other workers as well? The answer seems to be yes, because this is going to be a holistic change in terms of implementation of social security measures to the unorganized sector. Now, as far as gratuity is concerned, it is going to be, it's the same, that you have to, the concerned employee has to render not less than 5 years of continuous service, then only he will be eligible to get the gratuity. But there are 2 exceptions that are carved out now, one for the working journalists and the other, of course, for our fixed term employees. But the industrial code, industrial relations code, when it has used the definition of wages, it said the gratuity will be payable to a fixed term employee provided he has rendered a he is engaged for at least 1 year. So that thing probably we need to be looking at while making the payment to the fixed term employees. And of course, the payment will be on pro rata basis for a fixed term employee, and also in the case of death of an employee, the gratuity is to be payable on pro rata basis. There is actually no change in the amount of contribution to the amount of gratuity that is payable, which is going to be 15 days wages for every completed year of service. So Building and Other Construction Cess Act, that is, which is also subsumed within this SS code, Social Security Code, provides for levy of cess, building and other construction workers cess, which is again for the welfare or the benefit of the building and construction workers. The cess is payable on the cost of construction, and the cost of construction excludes specifically the cost of land and the compensation payable to employee or kin under the employee compensation provisions. Additionally, the BOCW definition has now been expanded to exclude work related to construction of own residential house of an individual or group of individuals for their own residence, and the total cost of such construction should not exceed 50 lakhs. The chapter dealing with BOCW also provides that the employer must deposit the BOCW cess within 60 days of completion of each of the building or other construction work. So the cess is going to be paid on self-assessment basis. The employer himself can assess what is the cost of construction. Accordingly, he may pay the BOCW cess. Then what does completion of each building or other construction imply is to be also seen. Maybe the rules may throw some light on what constitute each building or construction work. Now, the other thing which was subsumed, I think I'm left with only 1 or 2 slides. The other thing which was subsumed is the Employment Exchanges Act. Employee Compensation Act. Basically, the Employee Compensation Act provides for notice to be given if there is any kind of accident that has occurred to the competent authority. Now, as a concept, if you see, generally the compensation is payable by the employer under the employee compensation scheme if there is any occupational disease or if the employee has met with an accident. In these 2 situations, the employer will be responsible or liable for making compensation to the employee. Now there is expansion of liability in the hands of the employer, where it says compensation shall still be payable if the employee acting in contravention of any law or order, if it has taken place in connection while he is performing the trade or business of the concerned employer. And then one interesting definition, which has also been interesting provision that has also been extended, is the commutation to and from home is also considered as to have taken place in the course of employment if nexus can be established. So if the accident has taken place in the course of employment, the employer is supposed to pay the compensation. This in the course of employment has been slightly extended to also mean if the employee commutation or the travel time or the travel place, and if the accident has taken place during his commutation, then the employer may also be responsible now, provided some kind of nexus is established. Now, as part of the changes, funeral expenses has been increased to 15,000 from 5,000, and 3rd schedule actually of the Code on Social Security provides for what are the various kinds of occupational diseases and certain accidents. These instances can be further added only by the appropriate government, and these are specific and standard. These are not, the appropriate government cannot modify them, but it can only add the instances of occupational disease or accident. As part of the act, the outer limit of the compensation that is payable to the under the employee compensation is also removed. Now, the other concept, which is basically the employment exchanges, which has been subsumed within the career centers, is that the employer, the appropriate government may require the employers to report the vacancies to the career centers, and then the prospective candidates can approach the career centers and seek the information relating to the vacancies available under the with an employer. But having said that, it does not impose any kind of obligation on the employer to recruit those persons who are referred by the career centers or referred from the career centers as such. There is only one small shift in the appellate mechanism. Whenever you wanted to prefer any kind of an appeal against any particular order of the PF issued passed by the PF authorities, you have to deposit 25% of the claim amount, which is called as a pre-deposit, in order to prefer the appeal. And the employee, any amount due under the provisions of this code are considered are to be paid in priority as per the provisions of IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which is also pari materia under the Companies Act under 530 of the earlier Companies Act. Now, on a concluding mark, the few things probably the employers need to be knowing is that what are the various registers and records that they need to maintain, and wage slips have also been wage slips which are generated electronically have also been recognized under the SS code, which is, I think, a very welcome step. Now, as a process, if you see, the introduction of the SS code is basically a compliance driven mechanism, and it provides the inspectors, it obligates the inspectors while doing the inspection to first give the information and offer what kind of guidance the employer would be required. Only then the inspector cum facilitator will be required to impose any kind of fine or penalty on an employer. But as a whole, if you see, probably in order to rationalize all the acts together, instead of having so many authorities or boards, probably the courts, the government should have brought only one single regulator to govern all the courts. But yes, it has its own implications and it has its own ramifications. But yes, the courts are going to be a welcome move as far as compliance is concerned. With this, I open the session for Q&A, sir.
Manojji, I think there are a couple of questions. In the interest of timeline, what we can do is we will begin with the first question which we received through email. The question was received from Mr. Swapnil Yelgaonkar, and there were two questions which were asked. First question which was asked was how new act, which I assume is code, will be implemented in respective states or states to require amend any labor laws, if any. So to answer that question, let us try to give you a brief background. All these codes essentially have been passed by the central government by virtue of the powers which they enjoy under the union list and concurrent list, which essence means union list, as you all are aware of, are matters where only central government can legislate. So far as concurrent lists are concerned, there are a couple of aspects under the code which are subject matter of concurrent list. In concurrent list, both central government and state government can make laws, but if there is any conflict, then the law which has been made by central government, that will prevail. Coming to your specific questions, how this act will be implemented in respective state or states, 2 or 3 things I would like to pinpoint. Number one, in the code, several acts have been repealed. There is another question, similar question, that what will happen to certain state related acts. First of all, the bottom line which is prescribed under the code is that if there is any law which is contradictory to the provisions of the act, to the extent of contradiction, the provisions of code will prevail. So therefore, if there is some existing statute in the state level and which is running contradictory to the provisions of this code, the code is going to prevail, to answer your first questions. Whether they amend, don't amend it, that is a separate matter. What will practically happen is that all those states also understand the constitutional position. They are going to, in all probability, amend laws, so that if there is any contradiction between the provisions of code and the other state laws, they will amend those laws. Number two, question is, rules are yet to be notified. So how can companies can complete the compliances? A very good question. Like I said, the code specifically provides that a part of the code or the entire code, they can note, they can have different dates for at the trigger dates or the effective dates, in the sense that okay fine, this part will come into effect from X date, this part will come into effect from Y date. At that point of time, by that point of time, obviously they would have framed the rules, otherwise it will not make sense, because most of the parts contain the code as prescribed. So rules will be in place, and then accordingly they will, in all probability, affect the provisions of the code, maybe in a staggered manner. How can companies can complete the compliances? What you need to do is, you need to start the groundwork, because the code has already laid down certain things. It's only a matter of time. It can be two stages. One is not dependent on the rules. Second is dependent on the rules. As and when the rules get notified, those compliances can be added to your compliance module. But certain things, definitely the planning can be done, because the code definitely gives you a bird's eye view of what the code is asking for. So you can start that groundwork. So that was the first question. Second question is, Mr. Mukul Chaturvedi has asked that what about the state acts like in Madhya Pradesh MP Industrial Relations Act is will be replaced? I think partly I've already answered in the first part of the first question, that yes, all those state acts, to the extent they are having contradictory provisions vis-a-vis the provisions of the code, the provisions of code will prevail, and accordingly what will happen is the state governments will also put in regulatory and legal law mechanisms and provisions which are in consonance with the code. Third is question is Mr. Sandeep. He has asked a question whether if some people has earned more than 18,000 salary per month and working as a supervisor, quality inspectors, can we consider them as staff? Yes. So far as supervisory thing is concerned, if somebody is having more than 80,000 per month as wages, then definitely he will not qualify as a worker. He will qualify as a employee. He will not qualify as a worker. So the rights, duties, benefits which are only available to a worker, that will not be available to him. I will come to the next question asked by Mr. Senthil Kumar. Mr. Senthil Kumar has asked, in fact, two questions. That if any factory is paying more than 18,000 for the workers, then they can't raise any dispute under this code. But currently they are covered under ID Act. What will be the impact on this? And then the second question is somewhat linked to this. The first question, and any workers with more than 18,000 salaries having an ID cases at court, and after this code they are not covered. So I think let me clarify, Senthilji, two things. So far as the concept of worker is concerned, broadly everything is getting covered, but there are two broad exceptions to general rule. One is managerial and administrative capacity. That is not linked to any monetary threshold. So if you can substantiate that somebody is actually doing a job which is in the nature of managerial or administrative work, then he will not qualify as a worker. So far as this threshold of 18,000 is concerned, this is only applicable for people who are working in supervisory capacity. So even if a worker is earning more than 18,000, and if the moment he is not qualifying under managerial or administrative capacity, or then in that particular case we cannot say that he is not a worker, so he will get the benefits available to a worker. So the bottom line is that 18,000 limit is only visible capacity. If somebody is working in supervisory capacity and is drawing wages exceeding 18,000 rupees per month, then he will not qualify as a worker. But suppose I am not working in a supervisory capacity, and as a worker I am getting more than 18,000, still I will qualify as a worker. To answer your second question, you are saying what will happen to the pending cases. See, the act will come into play from a prospective date, not from a retrospective date. not seem like the case. So accordingly, the pending cases will be dealt with the extent provisions of the law. Then is just a minute. We'll try to answer as much as possible. Nurul, I think this one maybe you can answer. Mr. Ashok Kumar has asked one question. Amount shown, I think, in one of the 13,000. Can you clarify whether it should be 13,000? Why 15,500 has been added?
So basically, you have to see the exclusions, just to count the exclusions, the included items, and 50% of the excluded items. If the 50% of the excluded items is not more than half of the included items, you have to include anything in addition to the excluded item. That you can work it out on that basis, sir. That is the majorly the definition part. Now, on the other question from Mr. Abhijit is that up to what salary level an employee shall remain eligible for bonus? Under the earlier act, we used to have certain limits, but there are no limits under the wages code. So all the employees will be eligible to remain avail the benefit of the bonus. The minimum and maximum limits are provided, which are 8.33 and 20% of the wages. I think Mr. Bennett Abhijit had also asked to comply with maximum 50% exclusion. Do we need to restructure the wages of officers getting higher than a limit? So you have to rework on the contributions for sure. You have to see what are the excluded items, and see if you can include it somewhere which does not exceed by more than 50%, then probably contribute on the excluded items as such. That is the answer, sir. And for Mr. Sandeep, most of the companies engaged in contract labors in their core area or similar one, after this code is implemented, can contract labor appointed only for minor activities. So you have to see what is the core activity for your industry or the company, and accordingly define what can come under the main code, main activity and incidental activity. So certain leeway has been given in the core activity definition itself. We have to see as to what is the main business line of business for your company, and then decide, sir. What is the
Nurul, just to add on to what Nurul said, Sandeep ji, it's not the case that if you are having core activity, you can only appoint for minor activity. Three broad things you need to dissect. One is, first of all, what is core activity? Core activity is an activity which is essential or necessary for a particular establishment, okay, for which it is set up. Okay. Now, second is, certain kind of things they have already excluded, like gardening, security, courier. They have already said. So for those, you can continue to take contract labor. Now let us try to see what all things which you are seeing as there is no blanket prohibition. There are three other exceptions other than the general exceptions. Of course, you cannot employ somebody contract labor, but then there is a proviso attached to it. Proviso will also add to your benefit. There are three things. One is, if you can that the normal functioning of the establishment is such that you require work to be done ordinarily through contractor. So if in your working, if an establishment is of such a nature and you can substantiate that that activity is required to be ordinarily done through a contractor, you can still take the benefit, even if it is a core activity. Second is, if you can substantiate that you don't require full-time workers for the major portion of the working hours, okay, for a particular activity, still you can take benefit of contract labor. And third is, if you can say that yes, there is any sudden increase of volume of work in the core activity, still you can take the benefit. So I think you should not draw an assumption that you cannot draw for minor, you can have contract labor for minor activities. No, just the onus has been shifted on the employers. But definitely within those prescribed exceptions also, based on a specific dissection, I feel there will be sufficient room and leeway
first exercise should be whether we will get the benefit of that exception or not. That is the foremost thing. Next one, Nurul, can you
Yeah.
deal with it? Fixed employee and PF contributions.
Fixed employee, nothing has been prescribed to Mr. Sandeep as to the fixed, what is the period that could be there for the fixed employee. But as far as gratuity is concerned, he would be eligible to the gratuity only on completion of 1 year period. So in order to be eligible to the benefit of the gratuity. Then for employees getting wages more than 15,000 per month, is it optional to pay PF contribution over the limit of 15,000? I think this is an issue that is now in existence, sir. Mr. Abhijit, I think that's the employer will not be obligated to contribute anything more than what he is supposed to do. This is there under the EPF Old Act, EPF and MP Act, and also carried in the new legislation. So anything beyond the mandatory requirement, the employee maybe can avail the benefit of contributing more, but the similar or matching contribution need not come from the employer. And for Mr. Sandeep, again, those people getting salary more than 18,000 per month and working as supervisors, can we consider them in staff category? Sudesh sir, can you take that?
Yeah, again, I think we have already answered that question. 18,000 threshold is for only for supervisors, but that does not mean if I as a worker I am getting more than 18,000, I will not qualify as a worker. Broad exceptions are if somebody is working in managerial and administrative capacity, there is no threshold prescribed, then he will definitely not qualify as a worker. But if somebody is working in a supervisory capacity, and if it is exceeding 18,000, then he will not qualify as a worker. So yes, if you can substantiate that a person A is working in a supervisory capacity and is drawing more than 18,000, then he will not qualify as a worker, then he will only qualify as an employee.
Yeah. To move on with Mr. Abhijit's query, is a self-employed mechanic who may be giving some regular annual maintenance service to some organized company is also coming under unorganized worker. That is correct. Do we need to submit a social security contribution for such external service provider? The answer is no, you need not. Then may we have a copy of, okay. Please explain on leave with wages with related to Karnataka State Act. Then which activities include and core activities? Yeah. How?
Okay, this one is core activities. I think we dealt with it. We already explained that essentially what will happen is that core activities, suppose I am manufacturing, say, I would say a electrical component. So to my mind, my preliminary take on that will be whether if I am manufacturing something and for loading, unloading per se in itself, will it qualify as a core activity or not? I think we can explore it further. Maybe loading, unloading can be brought within the purview of certain exceptions. That possibility can be explored. Second is reskilling fund. I think yes, the concept has been laid down in the code. They are going to prescribe mechanisms as to how the fund is going to be, contributed with and all those things. So let the rules and other things come into place, and then by virtue of those prescriptions, essentially we are going to get a more glimpse about the nitty-gritties which will be involved in this reskilling fund. But yes, it is the 15 days of wages which you need to contribute that has been highlighted in this particular code. That is what you need to contribute. If worker is getting deemed factory, means what is happening is that today we have got a concept of factory where they have increased the threshold from 10 to 20, 20 to 40, which we discussed. What they are saying is that for the purpose of this code, they can declare some establishment as a factory. Once, if they declare certain establishment as a factory, we already have a definition of a factory which is already existing, but there is an enabling provision which gives certain rights to the regulators that they can declare something as a factory. So what will happen is, if they declare something as a factory, then that place will also be deemed as a factory. Whatever obligations or strings are attached, or duties or obligations are attached vis-a-vis factory, then that will also be applicable on those particular deemed factories, because then they will be treated as a factory itself. If a worker is getting more than 18,000, then whether he is considered as worker or employee, this I think we have answered, that a worker is somebody who is doing various types of acts. They have already laid down the types of acts which a worker is going to do. So it can be manual, it can be skilled, it can be unskilled. All those things we have laid down in the concept of worker. The two exclusions which are there in the worker is that, like I said, if somebody is purely or mainly, rather mainly in a managerial or administrative capacity, he is not qualifying as a worker. And the second exception is, I'm not getting into the other related to police services and Air Force and Army Act. Those are not relevant for us. But if somebody is employed in a supervisory capacity and he is drawing wages exceeding 18,000 per month, then he will also not be qualified as a worker. But if per se I am doing nothing of a managerial or administrative or supervisory capacity, I am doing some manual, clerical, or skilled, unskilled work, or technical, operational, then definitely I will qualify as a worker. I think there was one more question regarding the leaves which can be carried forward. So 30 days leaves can be carried forward. I saw that question as well. Manojji, can we have rest of the questions through emails? If something has been missed out, we can answer through emails also.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
I think most of the questions we have made an attempt to answer, most of them, if not all of them, but most of it has been answered, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. Due to paucity of time, we can ask the participants to write back to us. They can also write to Elsina, and they can forward the questions to us. We'll be too happy to answer to them. We should now hand over the mic to Mr. Raju Goyal, sir, for the conclusion.
I think we were waiting for the conclusion of this very interesting session. I really think that both Mr. Nurul Hasan and Mr. Sudesh Kumar have done a great job. And, we've had very good participation. I sincerely thank both the speakers and the firm for their strong support in this. What we would request is that if there are any more questions that the participants have, they may send it to us on the email ID which they used for registration, which is of rajesh@elsina.com, and we will share them with the company, with the speakers, and we will try to get them answered. I know it is an area of great interest, and it's also a very complex area, but I hope that the new code will also lead to some simplification of this process of labor laws, which has always been a very difficult area for, particularly for the industry to deal with. So I think ultimately the aim is that, it should create a good working environment and a friendly environment between the management and the workers, and not something which is, anti to each other. It should more be a supportive ecosystem and a supportive relationship. I don't have anything else to say. I just want to thank everybody once again, and we really hope that everybody has benefited from this. Thank you very much, Mr. Srish Kumar and Mr. Nurul Hassan and Mr. Manoj Gupta.
Thank you, sir.
Bye bye.